Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. So today I want to talk about what it takes to become a financial advisor, or in particular an investment advisor, since it's actually the investment advisor laws that cover most of those who get paid for giving financial advice. So if you want to get licensed as a financial advisor, in practice you'll typically get licensed as an investment advisor. And with more and more people looking to become financial advisors these days, given both the potential just for working with people and helping them, which is very psychologically rewarding, and just the sheer financial compensation potential for being an advisor, which is also very rewarding. I'm getting more and more questions about when you actually have to register as an investment advisor, or just how you get a license to become a financial advisor. And a good example of this was a recent question I got from Jeff, who's graduating from a financial planning program soon and about to become a financial advisor. And so Jeff had inquired to the blog and asked, I'm starting an advisory business. I don't have any clients yet. Is it true that I can wait to reach the 5-client minimum in my state before I need to set up my RIA? So this is a great question and one that I'm hearing a lot. So let's delve a little into just some of the technical terms and rules that apply to becoming a financial advisor or an investment advisor that's going to get paid for financial advice. So an investment advisor is defined under the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 as an individual or entity who, for compensation, engages in the business of advising others on investments. And there are a couple of key points there. Number one is that you have to do it for compensation. Free advice does not trigger registration and licensing requirements. That's also why media personalities don't have to do investment advisor registrations, because they're not specifically getting paid for the financial advice. Step two is that you have to actually be in the business of advising. So a one-off, hey, I gave someone a little bit of advice and they, bought me dinner or something, doesn't necessarily trigger investment advisor registration either. You have to be regularly in the business of giving advice. But once you're launching a business to do it, you're holding out as being in the business of advice, you're actually working with clients on an ongoing basis, you have to register. And then the third requirement is that you have to be advising on investments. Technically, that means generalist financial advice or even comprehensive financial planning doesn't necessarily trigger a requirement to register as an investment advisor and get the license if you give no specific advice about investments. And that's important because we're seeing now the rise of areas like financial coaching, where people advise on cash flow and spending and debt management and general financial behaviors, but they don't give investment-specific advice, and so they don't necessarily have to register as an investment advisor. Now, in practice, many states just presume if you're holding out as a financial advisor, and especially if you're putting CFP certificate on your business card, you must be giving some kind of investment advice at some point along the way. And so they'll require you to register simply because you're holding out that way. But technically, it's the giving of investment advice and that portion of financial advice that really triggers a registration requirement. Now, it's also important to note here that when we talk about the compensation for getting paid for advice that requires you to become an investment advisor, it means actually getting paid a fee for financial advice. If you're looking to get paid commissions to sell investment products and work under a broker-dealer, then technically you get sponsored by the broker-dealer, you take a Series 6 or Series 7 exam to be able to legally get paid commissions to sell investment products. Similarly, you have to get a state insurance license to sell insurance products. So the rules for getting paid to sell products are completely different than the rules for getting paid for financial advice. Sometimes overlapping, there is such thing as being a hybrid advisor who does both, but functionally what we're talking about here is getting paid for financial advice. And it gets confusing sometimes because people across all of those different types still use broad labels like financial advisor to characterize all the different structures. Now, if you actually want to be in the business of engaging investment advice for fee compensation, you're acting as an investment advisor. And under the Investment Advisors Act of 1940, if you're acting as an investment advisor, you must register as one. So registration of an investment advisor happens one of two different ways. Either A, you can register in the primary state in which you do business as a state-registered advisor, or two, you can register with the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC for short. Now, in general, SEC registration is reserved for advisors who have at least $100 million in assets under management. So basically, it's for larger RIAs from $100 million all the way on up to billions of dollars and beyond. For those who have less than $100 million, all the way down to zero, because you don't have any clients or assets under management yet, or maybe you don't even intend to have assets under management because you're just getting paid hourly or monthly retainer fees, all of those advisors register with their state. Now, in this context, registering simply means registering either yourself as an investment advisor or a business entity as an investment advisor and becoming a registered investment advisor. So when you hear the label RIA, short for registered investment advisor, that means it's literally the person or the entity who's been registered as such. Now, technically, the RIA is the business. So either a business entity or you acting as a sole proprietor. The person who gives the advice is technically an investment advisor representative or an IAR under the RIA. So either you're an IAR of yourself because you're a sole proprietor, or you're an IAR of the entity that's registered as an investment advisor. Now, that's important because in order to become the IAR, in order to be the person that actually gives the advice under the registered entity, there's another requirement. You have to complete the Series 65 exam or have completed the Series 66 and the Series 7 from the broker-dealer side, which cross-qualifies you for the Series 65. So the Series 65 exam is a 130-question exam that you have 3 hours to complete. You have to get a 72% to pass. And it's a straight pass-fail exam. If you fail, you can retake it after a short waiting period and paying another registration fee. Now, it's not a terribly difficult exam as most people evaluate it, but it does require you to learn all the core laws that apply to investment advice. So most people will at least sign up for a Series 65 exam prep course or buy some study materials like Pass the 65, which is a popular book for studying for the Series 65 exam. Now, for those who have CFP certification or a related designation like the CFA, the CHFC, or the AICPA's PFS designations, most states will actually waive completing the Series 65 requirement because the reality is if you've done something like the Series 65, you've already covered way more than what if you've already done something like the CFP exam, you've already covered way more than what the Series 65 teaches anyways. So ultimately what that means is to get paid for investment advice, you need to both sign up for and pass the Series 65 exam or have the requisite designations, and then you actually have to go through the process of registering a registered investment advisor or RIA business. So you can kind of think of it like becoming eligible to legally drive a car. Ultimately, you need to both pass a driver's test and have a driver's license. So in the context of being a financial advisor, the Series 65 is like the driver's test. Becoming an RIA and registering is the equivalent of the license. Now, it's a little confusing in our world because we actually call the Series 65 the license and the RIA the registration, but the point is the same. You need to both pass a test and get registered in order to move forward. Now, the good news is there are at least compliant consulting firms out there that can help with the registration process for a cost typically of a couple $1,000s to do that. Now, for most advisors who are just getting started, you're going to have to become an RIA in your home state because you won't have the $100 million of regulatory AUM that it takes to get registered with the SEC. And in practice, registering with the state typically happens in two stages. Number one is that you establish your initial RIA that you register in your home state in order to start doing business and actually hold out as a financial advisor. Then as you add clients in other states, then you have to extend your registration to those other states as well. Now, the good news is you do the Series 65 once. That covers the licensing exam requirement to do any and all of the registrations. So the initial registration process in your home state is a little more intense because that's the actual creation of the business and all of the filing requirements on Form ADV to register it. Adding additional states is easier. It does require a filing fee, which typically varies from as low as about $50 and up to a few $100s, going state by state. And then states will generally want to review your Form ADV, which is the formal registration document that you create in your original home state that basically details what you do for clients, what you charge, what services you're offering, so that the state can affirm that what you'll be doing is appropriate. Now, in practice, I find most states pretty quickly affirm a new state registration if what you were already doing was acceptable in your home state. But there are some differences among states, particularly for those who don't do assets under management and instead provide other types of financial advice for hourly fees, fixed fees, retainer fees, monthly subscription fees, and such. Because the reality is that the AUM model is pretty standardized. So it's very straightforward for regulators to review it and approve it. Ironically, what we're finding is while fixed fees and hourly fees and monthly fees are a more transparent compensation model, frankly, for advisors, it's newer for regulators. And so we're actually seeing sometimes that triggers a more intense review. So just they're going to go through the ADV in more detail. They're going to want to make sure you're really clear about what you're doing in return for the compensation you're receiving, that you're serving clients appropriately. Now, in terms of the timing, the rules state that you add a new state registration anytime that you have clients in the state. Now, a few states like Texas and Louisiana say you have to register before you accept even your first client. Most states, though, have what's called a de minimis rule, which says if you have a minimal number of clients, less than 5, and you haven't set up any physical location in the state, you don't have to register yet. Or stated another way, you don't actually have to register in the new state until you have more than 5 clients, physical location in the state, or you're otherwise actively marketing and soliciting for clients in that state. Now, once you've registered with the SEC, if you go that route or you're eligible, the SEC is essentially a single federal registration that transcends all the states. And so while you still have to notify states that you're doing business in their state, it's a much simpler notification process and doesn't require as much of an intense ADV review. For those who are state registered, though, which will frankly be most people who are getting started, you're still going to go state by state, and you're going to have to add the states over time. So even if you get to 100 million in SEC registration down the road, you're still going to start in your home state and add the states incrementally until you get to $100 million of assets under management. Notably, there is a special rule as well that says if you need to register in at least 15 different states, you can also qualify for SEC registration, even if you don't have the $100 million, because at that point, you've got so many states that the federal registration is kind of an easy way out, and they allow you to do it. Still, though, that means you're going to go up to 5 clients in each state, getting over the 5-client line, then getting over 15 states that each have 5+ clients to get there. Not actually very common for many solo practitioners. Now, in the context of Jeff's original question about whether he can wait until he gets 5 clients to set up his RIA, the answer is actually no. Once you're going to hold out as giving investment advice for compensation, you need to register in the home state now before you start soliciting clients. Now, once you've created the initial RIA in your home state, pardon me, you won't have to add other states until you reach their de minimis requirements, which, as we said earlier, is at least 5 clients in most states unless it's Texas or Louisiana. But that home state registration, that initial registration, should be happening before you take on your first client. Now, fortunately, the reality is the cumulative costs to set up and establish an RIA are still pretty modest, at least relative to the income potential of being a financial advisor. I've seen a lot of advisors get their advisory business launched for less than $10,000, including the compliance consulting support and the core technology you need in order to run the business. In point of fact, we cover almost all of that with organizations like XY Planning Network for $5,000 a year. In reality, though, the biggest constraint in the cost of starting an RIA isn't actually the cost to create the business and register and make it legal. It's the income you won't earn while you're going to get clients who aren't paying you yet. And unfortunately, that's not the kind of thing you can usually get a startup loan for. Banks may loan you money for hardware and equipment and the stuff you need to run and operate the business, not to cover your personal expenses while you're waiting to get enough clients to cover your bills. So you should always have a plan for that income gap between when you walk away from maybe income in an old job until you get enough clients, enough revenue to take out a healthy income from the new job. But the key point here is simply to recognize what it takes to legally become a financial advisor, really an investment advisor who gets paid for financial advice that includes advice on investments. And that you do have to register as an investment advisor and complete the Series 65 licensing exam to do so. And that you should do all of this in your home state before you start soliciting clients, as the whole point of licensing and registration is so that the regulators know you're in the business before you're actually in a position where you could cause client harm because you're not set up appropriately. But it's also notable that's all you actually need to become a financial advisor. You don't have to actually get designations like CFP certification to be licensed as a financial advisor. They are purely voluntary. Now, I'm a strong advocate that every financial advisor should get some professional designation like CFP certification so that you actually know what the heck you're talking about when you give people advice about their life savings. So you don't hurt your clients due to your own lack of knowledge or accidental ignorance. But at this point, it is a voluntary requirement. There's no actual technical competency requirement for being a financial advisor beyond that minimum Series 65 licensing exam, which is frankly more about knowing investment advisory laws and not much about actual financial advice. But I hope that helps a little, some food for thought for any of you that are thinking about getting started as a financial advisor or switching over to launch a registered investment advisor. This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces, usually 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays. Thanks for hanging out with us, and have a great day, everyone.